Today I am sharing a beautiful quilt pattern from Charisma Horton. Isn't it just amazing? It is called Onward and Upward, and I will be sharing links to this pattern in the description of this video, as well as kits that she has available. This quilt here is available on her site as a kit, and it is available in a bunch of different color combinations. The main colors are always the same, the black, white, and gray. And then these accent colors are what changes out. So there's a few different ones that you can choose from. I would definitely call this a more modern pattern, and a lot of Charisma's patterns are more modern. So if you're like me and have some goals to kind of branch out this year, I think you will love her patterns. I had two quilty goals set for this year. One was to finish up some flimsies I have, and not doing so great at that. But the other was to work on some more modern patterns. And this was a perfect way to kind of ease into that. It does have a very modern feel to it, especially with this color scheme and the more solid colors. But it is definitely not as modern as some patterns that I see out there. So it's kind of like taking baby steps into trying out some new styles. Plus, I have some fun ideas for some stuff I would like to do with this quilt, and I'll share those at the end of this video. Now, I want to talk about the pattern a little bit. It is really, really easy to follow, and it all comes together with half square triangles. So if you're a beginner quilter and you have learned how to do half square triangles, do not worry about jumping into this pattern. It is all pieced using half square triangles, and it is very, very easy to bring this quilt together. You can see a lot of the blocks are really, really big. So it really pieces very quickly after you get the half square triangles made. I really loved putting this together, and like I said, I already have some more ideas because it was just so fun making this quilt. All right, so let's jump in and take a look at some of the elements of the quilt and how it kind of comes together, and then I'll share my ideas with you. So I'm working through the Onward and Upward pattern from Charisma Horton. And the first thing I like to do when I'm working on a new pattern is read through the entire thing and make sure I understand everything in the pattern. I've done that. I don't have any questions. But another thing I like to do is, you can see I'm using different colors here than the pattern. I have a dark purple and a light purple. And in the pattern, they refer to a gold and yellow. I like to just jot a note in the pattern that I'm using different colors. So I'll write dark purple where the gold is and light purple where the yellow is. It just helps me make sure I get all the fabric in the right spot. Now you can see here some of these squares are very large. I'm not going to give away the pattern dimensions or anything like that, but I have these black, gray, and white squares that are very sizable. Those are not easy for me to cut because I don't have a ruler that is that large and square. So if you have any tips on cutting squares like this large, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear those tips. What I did, so if you don't have a way to cut those large squares like me, and if we don't get any good tips in the comments and you want to do this pattern, what I did was I used the grids on my cutting mat. My cutting mat is, I think it's 24. Yeah, so it's 24 by 36 inches. So I was definitely able to cut these squares on it. I just prefer using a ruler. So I was definitely able to make it work, but if you have any tips outside of using the grid on the mat, let me know. I would love to hear them. All right, so this pattern has a lot of half square triangles, and I love half square triangles. So what I'm going to do, and what I like to do, and I know I've talked about before, that when I'm working on a pattern, I like to work through as many steps as I can at each station in my room. So if I'm doing a lot of pressing, I want to get as much pressing as I can get done at that time. I like to cut all my fabric at once. If I'm doing some sewing, I'll look through the pattern and see what I can get sewn at one time. So for example, in this pattern, it might tell me to take 5 black squares and 5 white squares and make some half square triangles. I'm going to look through the pattern and see if any gray and black need to get paired, any gray and white need to get paired, any of these purple and light purple need to get paired, so I can get all of that done at once. I find that a lot more productive, and I can get a lot more done because I'm just sitting and sewing and sewing and sewing, and I can get all that done, then trim, press, and all that all in bulk at different times. So I've talked about that. That's what I like to do. I'm going to get these paired up and I'll show you what that looks like for me. All right, so here are the fabrics that I have paired together. I have my light purple and dark purple squares that are all paired together. These are going to become half square triangles that have a side with a light purple and then a dark purple side. To construct these, I'm going to use the diagonal seam tape on my sewing machine to sew corner to corner, a 1/4 inch from a line that would be drawn down the center. My diagonal seam tape is going to create that line down the center, and then there will be a 1/2 inch of stitching on either side of that line when I'm finished. Now, with these larger squares, essentially I'm going to be doing the same thing, but because of the table space that I have at my sewing machine, I cannot put a diagonal seam tape long enough to keep this lined up properly. So I drew a line corner to corner on all of my white squares, and then I pinned them to either a gray or a black square per the pattern. This will work in the same way. I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch along each side of the diagonal line. You can see here on these larger squares, I do have a bunch of pins in here. This is because, like I said, my table space is not large enough to lay this out flat. And because there's going to be some pulling in either direction, I added a lot of pins to all these to hold everything straight. We're going to be sewing across this bias area. There's a lot of stretch and give there. So the more I can try to keep this nice and even by adding pins or different things on these bigger squares, the better it will be for me. So after I sew all of these a 1/4 inch from each line, I'll be pressing them, cutting down the center, this diagonal line, and pressing them again and trimming them up if needed. So I'll of course show you all that after sewing, but this is quite a bit of sewing I'm going to be doing. You can see here I didn't pin any of these because usually I can line them up really straight on the table that I sit at to sew. This should be a great size to keep in place. Like I said, I also did starch a lot of these, so that should help me as well. That is also one of the reasons I like to starch a lot when I'm doing a lot of half square triangle work. So I'm going to get to sewing on these. I'll show you some of that, especially with these squares in the diagonal seam tape, and then we'll get to trimming and how all that will work. All right, so now that we have that line of stitches sewn along each side of the center diagonal, we are going to cut them in half. But something you may want to do, and I learned this on Chris's channel, Sew the Distance, she pressed all of hers first, and I could tell it really made a difference on getting that bubble you can sometimes see down the center, and it really helped her half square triangles turn out really nice. So I've been trying that with mine, and they are really looking very, very nice from doing that extra little press. So now I'm going to cut them in half, and that will get us that nice half square triangle. So You can see there though, if you open it up, you have those dog ears. So I've been using this cute little dog ear clipper tool that I got in one of my fat quarter shop boxes, the Sew Sampler, and it really works really nice for clipping these little dog ears if you don't need to trim your half square triangles down. Mine turned out to be pretty much exactly the right size from what I need in the pattern. Now, I would say if you are a little new to doing half square triangles, or you're not very comfortable sewing a straight line and all that, which is understandable. I have been there, and you know, slowly with how much I've been sewing, all of that gets a little bit better. But if you need a little more wiggle room, don't be afraid to cut these squares a little larger so that you can trim them down to perfect half square triangles if you need to. So I've been pressing all of my seams to the dark side here. So I just add a little heat and then gently press them open, then add a little more heat. Now, when I press, I usually don't get a perfectly flat seam, so I'll show you what I like to do. Now, I've shown it before. I really like using this Easy Press pin. It gets my seams nice and flat and makes it so much easier for sewing really nice and accurate because you don't have that little bubble here at the seam. So I just put a little of this liquid on along this raised side of the seam, so the side that it's being pressed to. You want to wait a few seconds. The instructions for this pin say to wait about 10 seconds, so I'll usually do the one I did first if I'm doing multiple, and then you just hold the iron on for 10 seconds or so, and it will press that seam so flat. It does give you an extra step that you have to do, but it's so worth it if you're really wanting everything to turn out nice and accurate. So you can see I have a ton of these half square triangles. Now, what you'll be doing with them is making this block. So we're making a triangle. You can see here I have those half square triangles along here. There's 3 of them in this formation, but you also have these triangles here. So how you're going to get those is by cutting your extra dark squares. So for me, it was a dark purple. You might be using something else. You're going to be cutting those in half along the diagonal. So you'll just need to cut all these squares in half, corner to corner, along the diagonal. And then those will be used to complete half of the block. So they would just go in those little corners. Now, then across this other half, you'll be using one of your black or your gray triangles. Now, how did you get those triangles? Well, you would have some leftover black and gray large squares. So you would just cut these in half just to say the same way you do the smaller ones, from corner to corner, and you'll be making these cute blocks like this that will either have a gray or a black side on them. So it's kind of a bigger half square triangle that's a little more decorative. A lot of fun there. So let me show you one finished. So here is one all sewn together. A really, really cute block. So once you get all of these sewn with either a gray side or a black side, you'll be ready to lay out your quilt. So once I got all of those main blocks pieced together, it was really just laying out the quilt per the pattern and bringing it all together. It really came together fast after that, just bringing those rows together. And than piecing all the rows. I really loved making this quilt, and as I was working on it, all I could think was how fun it would be to change out those accent areas, like on mine where the purple is and the kind of smaller half square triangles. It would be really fun to change those out with scrap fabric that I have on hand. You still have those large elements with the gray, the black, and the white on this quilt that will kind of keep everything coming together, but changing out the dark purple and the light purple with scraps of fabric, I think will be a fun way to use up some of my scraps, but not make the quilt look too busy. I know it can be challenging sometimes thinking about how you want to use scraps and worrying about, it not all coming together nicely, but I think it really would in this quilt. So if you think that that would be a fun quilt to work on with me, let me know in the comments. You can grab this pattern from Charisma's website and we can work on that together. I think it would be a lot of fun. So let me know if you're interested in the comments, and it'll be something that I work on in the future, and we can all sew a nice scrappy quilt together. All right, let me know what you thought of this pattern in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And let me know what colors you would like to use in this pattern. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.